This is a whale skeleton. It was found in the middle of the Egyptian desert, buried in sandstone, miles from the nearest ocean. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth.
Longer geological narrative. Rock art scattered across. Algeria, Chad. Sahara's current state is only one chapter in afar.
3.6 million square miles of sand and rock. It looks empty, lifeless, like it's always been this way. But that whale tells a different story, because the Sahara wasn't always a desert. It was an ocean. Then it was a paradise. Then it was home to civilizations that built cities in the sand. Every single one of those worlds disappeared. Today, we're peeling back the layers, uncovering the oceans, the rivers, the people who lived and died where there's nothing but sand today. The Sahara looks permanent, but it has buried entire worlds beneath it. And what we find changes everything. The place where that whale was found is called Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales. It's in the western desert of Egypt, about 100 miles southwest of Cairo. And it's not just one skeleton. There are hundreds of them, scattered across the sand like a graveyard frozen in time. These aren't small whales either. Some of them are over 60 feet long, ancient species with names like Basilosaurus and Dorudon. Whales that had tiny, useless hind legs because they were still evolving from land animals back into the sea. They lived here 40 million years ago. And when they died, they sank to the ocean floor and got buried in sediment. Over millions of years, that sediment turned to rock. And when the ocean disappeared, the rock stayed behind, along with everything in it. The scientists who study this place have found more than just whales, sharks, sea cows, crocodiles, entire ecosystems preserved in stone, all of it sitting in one of the driest places on the planet. So what happened? Where did the ocean go? 40 million years ago, there was a body of water called the Tethys Ocean. It stretched from what is now the Mediterranean all the way to India. The Sahara region sat right at the edge of it. Warm, shallow water, perfect for marine life. But the continents were moving. Africa was drifting north toward Europe. The Indian subcontinent was colliding with Asia. And as those land masses came together, they squeezed the Tethys Ocean like a vice. Slowly, over millions of years, the water drained away. Some of it got trapped and became the Mediterranean Sea. The rest evaporated or found new paths to other oceans. And what was left behind was land. Dry land. The whales didn't adapt. They couldn't. When the water disappeared, they went with it. And their bones became the first layer of what would eventually become the Sahara. But that's not where the story ends. Because millions of years later, something impossible happened. The desert came back to life. 10,000 years ago, if you stood where that whale skeleton is today, you wouldn't see sand. You'd see grass, trees, herds of animals moving across open savanna. You'd see lakes the size of countries and rivers that ran for thousands of miles. This is called the African Humid Period, or the Green Sahara. And it wasn't a small change. It was a complete transformation. The same place that had been a desert for millions of years suddenly became one of the wettest regions in Africa. Rain fell year-round. Mega lakes formed across Libya, Chad, and Sudan. Some of them were deeper than the Great Lakes in North America. Rivers like the Nile and the Niger swelled to sizes we can barely imagine today. And people came. Hunter-gatherers first, then pastoralists with cattle and goats. They settled along the shores of the lakes, fished in the rivers, and painted what they saw on the rocks. Those paintings are still there. You can find them in places like the Tassili Narja Plateau in Algeria and the Akarkas Mountains in Libya. Images of giraffes, elephants, hippos, crocodiles. Animals that haven't lived in the Sahara for thousands of years. The paintings show people too, dancing, hunting, herding cattle, living full lives in a place that's now completely uninhabitable. So how did this happen? How did a desert turn into a paradise? It comes down to something called the African monsoon, the same weather system that brings rain to sub-Saharan Africa today. But 10,000 years ago, it was stronger, and it reached much farther north. The reason has to do with the tilt of the Earth. Every 20,000 years or so, our planet's axis shifts slightly, and when it does, It changes how much sunlight different parts of the world get during different seasons. Around 11,000 years ago, North Africa was getting more direct sunlight in the summer. That warmed the land. The warm land heated the air above it, and that hot air rose, creating a low-pressure system that sucked in moisture from the Atlantic Ocean. That moisture became rain. Lots of it. Enough to fill lakes and sustain grasslands and transform the landscape completely. For 5,000 years, it lasted. Entire generations lived and died without ever knowing the Sahara as a desert. Around 5,700 years ago, the rains started to fail. It didn't happen slowly. It happened fast. Within a few centuries, the monsoons weakened and shifted south. The lakes began to dry up. The grasslands turned brown. Rivers that had flowed for thousands of years slowed to a trickle, then stopped completely. The people who lived there watched it happen. Generation after generation, the water receding, the fish dying, the herds moving south, and they had to make a choice. Most of them left. Archaeological evidence shows a mass migration out of the Sahara around this time. Abandoned settlements with tools and pottery scattered across what used to be lake shores. Empty villages that were just left behind when the water ran out. Some went south, following the rains into West Africa. Others went east toward the Nile Valley, where the river still flowed reliably, fed by rains falling hundreds of miles away in the Ethiopian highlands. And that's where things get interesting, because the Nile Valley is where Egyptian civilization began. Around the same time, the Sahara was collapsing. Some researchers think the two events are connected, that the collapse of the Green Sahara forced thousands of people to concentrate along the Nile, where water was still reliable, and that concentration created the conditions for civilization to emerge. Think about it. When you have small groups spread across a huge area, living off the land, there's no need for complex organization. But when thousands of people are forced into a narrow river valley, competing for the same resources, suddenly you need systems. Ways to manage water rights, distribute food, settle disputes. You need hierarchy, rules, government. The timing is almost perfect. The Sahara dried out around 5,700 years ago. Egyptian civilization started organizing around 5,000 years ago. The pyramids were built 4,500 years ago. The people who painted giraffes on cave walls in the Sahara might have become the people who built monuments to pharaohs along the Nile. But not everyone left. Some people stayed, and they found a way to survive in a place that was becoming more hostile every year. They went underground. In southern Libya, buried beneath the sand, there's a network of tunnels, hand-carved, miles long. Some of them go down 100 feet or more. They're called foggeras, and they were built by a civilization most people have never heard of, the Garamantes. They lived in the Sahara from around 500 BC to 700 AD, over 1,000 years, long after the Green Sahara had dried up, long after everyone else had left. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. How? By mining water. The foggeras weren't just tunnels, they were sophisticated irrigation systems that required an understanding of hydrology, geology, and engineering that rivals anything we build today. Here's how they worked. The Garamantes would dig a mother well straight down through sand and rock, sometimes 100 feet or more, until they hit the water table, in the heat, hauling up tons of debris using nothing but rope and muscle. Then they'd dig horizontally, following the aquifer, but the tunnel had to slope gently upward toward the surface.
Right here, this is the very tip of the skull.
Wow,
And
that's the skull?
yes, exactly.
Just the right gradient. Too steep, and the water flows too fast, eroding the tunnel. Too shallow and it doesn't flow at all. They calculated this by hand. No instruments, no blueprints, just knowledge passed down through generations. Every few meters, they dig vertical shafts from the surface down to the tunnel for ventilation and removing debris. You can still see these shafts from satellites today, chains of circular depressions marching across the desert in straight lines. Some stretch for miles. The longest systems ran over 10 miles from water source to city. They built hundreds of them. The water flowed by gravity alone. No pumps, no machinery. It would emerge in the city, distributed through channels to farms and homes. At their peak, the Garamantes controlled an area the size of France. Their capital, Garama, was a city. multi-story buildings, paved streets, defensive walls, a population that may have reached tens of thousands. They had a written language, advanced metallurgy. They forged iron tools and weapons. They made jewelry from gold. They bred horses and controlled the caravan routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean. Rome knew who they were. Roman sources mention them by name. This was a full civilization operating in one of the harshest environments on Earth for over 1,000 years. But there was a problem they couldn't engineer around. The water wasn't renewable. It was fossil water, ancient reserves from the Green Sahara period. Once that climate window closed, the aquifers stopped refilling. Every gallon they pulled up had been sitting there for thousands of years and would never be replaced. Over centuries, the water table dropped. Wells had to be dug deeper. New fogaras had to reach farther. The systems became more complex, more expensive, more vulnerable. The math stopped working. The water they could extract dropped below what they needed. Fields went dry, crops failed, food became scarce, people left. By 700 AD, it was over. Cities abandoned, fogaras collapsed, trade routes shifted. The desert reclaimed everything. You can still visit the ruins today. Empty buildings half buried in sand, collapsed tunnels, silent streets where thousands once lived. But the water is still down there, deeper now, harder to reach, and we're using it. Beneath the Sahara, there are aquifers that hold more water than all the rivers and lakes on the surface of Africa combined. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer is one of the largest. It stretches across Libya, Egypt, Chad, and Sudan. Millions of cubic kilometers of fossil water, the same ancient water the Garamantes used. Today, we're pumping it out faster than they ever could. Libya built something called the Great Man-Made River, started in 1984. One of the largest civil engineering projects in history. Over 2,800 miles of pipeline. Some pipes are 13 feet in diameter. You could drive a car through them. The network pulls water from over 1,000 wells, some going down over 1,600 feet. The water gets pumped hundreds of miles north to Tripoli and Benghazi. At its peak, the system moved over 6 million cubic meters per day, enough to fill 2,400 Olympic pools. Every day, it supplies 70% of Libya's fresh water. Without it, those cities couldn't exist in their current form. Egypt is doing the same thing. The New Valley Project. Massive farms in the western desert where nothing should grow. Center pivot systems pulling fossil water. Perfect green circles visible from space. Chad is tapping the aquifer. Sudan is tapping it. All using the same ancient water. And just like the Garamantes, it's not sustainable. Satellite data shows the water table dropping, year after year. In some areas, falling several feet annually. Wells that used to produce hundreds of gallons per minute are slowing down. Some have gone dry. The Libyans are drilling deeper, just like the Garamantes did. There are farms in the Sahara today that look like miracles. Green fields growing wheat and tomatoes. But if you look at satellite images from 10 or 20 years ago, you'll see farms that are now abandoned. Brown circles where pivots used to rotate, because the water ran out. The Garamantes didn't have computers or satellites. They didn't have models telling them how much water was left. They just knew the wells were slowing, and they needed to dig deeper. We have all that data. We know exactly how much water is in the aquifer. We know how fast we're extracting it. We know it's not being replenished. We can see the decline in real time. And we're doing it anyway, because the alternative is telling millions of people in desert cities that the water is running out, that the farms will fail, that we built a civilization in a place that can't sustain it. The Garamantes lasted over 1,000 years before the water ran out. At current extraction rates, some estimates say we have less than a century. Maybe we'll find another solution: desalination, better conservation, technology the Garamantes never had. Or maybe we're just the next layer, the next civilization that thought it could engineer around geology, the next set of ruins the desert will bury. Because the Sahara is still holding a buried world, and we're still trying to use it. The Sahara looks empty, but it's not. It's a graveyard of worlds, an ocean that lasted millions of years, full of whales and sharks and crocodiles, erased when the continents shifted and the water drained away. A green paradise that lasted 5,000 years, with lakes the size of seas and rivers that don't exist anymore, erased when the monsoons moved south. A civilization that lasted over 1,000 years, engineering survival through underground water systems that rivaled anything we build today, erased when the fossil water ran out. And now us, building cities in the desert, pumping ancient water to the surface, creating green fields where nothing should grow, knowing it can't last. The Sahara isn't permanent. Nothing is. It's been an ocean, a paradise, a graveyard and a desert, and it will become something else again when we're gone. What we see as solid and unchanging is just a snapshot, one moment in a story that's been unfolding for millions of years, one layer that will eventually be buried like all the others. The lesson isn't subtle. Entire worlds can vanish. Oceans, ecosystems, civilizations, all of it can be erased and buried so completely that future generations won't even know it was there, unless they dig. And when they do, they'll find us. The people who knew the water was running out and kept pumping anyway. The people who had all the data and all the technology and still couldn't find a way to live within the limits of their environment. Will be another layer, another mystery, another civilization that disappeared beneath the sand. The Sahara isn't empty. It's layered history. Every grain of sand sitting on top of worlds that came before, and what we find beneath it changes everything we thought we knew about what's permanent and what's not.